Hi you guys, today is Monday, March 30th and day 6, lockdown. I wanted to talk to you guys about how to solve a quadratic using the quadratic formula. If you were at school on Friday before spring break, I ran through this. Everyone else is going to be new information for. So you might want to get your notebook out. You do not need graph paper, and you're going to go ahead and take notes. So you can freeze the screen or just keep going. So today, quadratic formula and the discriminant, which I'm going to explain to you. So this is the quadratic formula. Most of you guys sang that for me, so you are familiar with it. You just might not know how to use it. So remember, when we're trying to solve a quadratic, sometimes we have two answers, one answer, or no answers. So those, when we get our answers, we'll either have one, two, or no answers. Okay, so first of all, the first thing that you want to do is you want to take the equation and you want to put it in standard form and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 4x from both sides. So I have 2x squared minus 4x minus 7 equals 0. Now that it's set equal to 0, I'm going to figure out what my A is, what my B is, and what my C is. Usually what I will do is I will make sure that my A is positive. So if this A was negative right here, I would divide the entire equation by -1 and change the signs of everything. But since A is positive now, I can leave it that way. So A is 1, B is -4, and C is -7. All right, so I'm going to use this equation, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill it in because I know I don't have a ton of room. Okay, so negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So in this example, I went ahead and filled in every little thing. I know as you get quicker, you might be doing shortcuts, but I just want to make sure I point this out because a lot of kids make a mistake right here. It's minus b, and since b is -4, now we have two negatives. So then my next step is just going to be to clear up a few things that I can. So I'm going to deal with this negative, and I'm going to make it 4 plus or minus the square root of, I'm going to go ahead and say -4 squared is 16. And then I'm going to multiply this, -4 and 1 and -7, and I'm going to get 28 all over 2. So that step, I didn't just do one little tiny thing at a time. I was able to do quite a few things. Now I'm going to add up inside my radical. Okay, so at this point, I have to look here under the radical, and I notice I can simplify it. I'm saying to myself, what perfect squares? So remember, your perfect squares are 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16. These are your perfect squares, 25, and it keeps going. Which of these numbers goes into 44 without having a decimal? And so we notice 4. So we're going to go ahead and break that apart and say that's the same thing as 4 times 11. And so when I simplify this here, I get, the square root of 4 is 2. All right, and then I notice 4, 2, and 2, because they're all outside the radical, they can be simplified. So if I divide 4 by 2, I get 2 plus or minus, and then 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I can leave my answer like this. That's one option. And that's two answers, because one answer is 2 plus radical 11 and the other answer is 2 minus radical 11. So it really depends on the question. If this question says leave in simplest radical form, you would leave your answer like that. If it says turn it into a decimal, then you're just going to put radical 11, which is 3.3. So I'm just going to also write here, we're saying that's the same thing as 2 plus 3.3. And then I would also have to say, which is 5.3, I would say it's also 2 minus 3.3, which is -1.3. So if I keep my answer in simplest radical form, it's right here. And if I turn it into decimals, then I get these two decimals. okay? Because basically this parabola, when you go back to the original equation, you know it's a happy face. You could find the vertex if you wanted to graph it, but just who wants to do that, right? We know there's two answers. It's a happy face, and it goes through 5 something and -1 something, and so we have two solutions because it goes through the x in 2 places. All right, let's move on to number 2. Right over here, the same first step. We're gonna put this in standard form. Now, if I subtract x squared from both sides, I'm gonna have a negative x squared. So I really don't wanna do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and move everything over here and make this equal to 0. So I'm gonna have x squared plus x minus 21 is equal to 0. And now I can identify my a, b, and c. A is 1, b is 1, and C is -21. I'm trying to think here for a second. Did I do something wrong? Oh, I think I did a different equation on my other assignment. Okay, so let's just work with this one. So now I'm gonna use that equation, -b plus or minus, and usually I like for you guys to write it out, but this is just taking up so much room that I'm gonna kind of just fill it in. So -b, so I have -1 plus or minus the square root of b squared, 1 squared, minus 4 times a, whoops, I wrote this in the wrong order, but because the community property, it doesn't matter. So -4, that should be a and then c, but that's okay, over 2 times a. So now I'm just gonna simplify this, make it look a little nicer. I have -1 plus or minus, 1 squared is 1. Let's do 4 times 21. Is 84 plus 84 all over 2. So I have -1 plus or minus the square root of 85 over 2. Okay, is there a perfect square that goes into 85? 25 doesn't, 4 doesn't, 9 doesn't, 16? Doubt it. Okay, I think that, so that is simplest radical form because no perfect square goes into that. And now I'm going to go ahead, if it said keep it in simplest radical form, I would keep it like that. Or I'm going to turn it into a decimal. So I'm going to put 85 square rooted is, so I have -1 plus 9.2 over 2 and -1 minus 9.2 over 2. -1 plus 9.2 divided by 2, so I get 4.1, 1 negative, minus 9.2 divided by 2, -9.1. Okay, so if I keep it in radical form right here, if I turn it into decimals right there. Okay, so I want you guys to go ahead and do the next 2 problems. Go ahead and you can pause the video, and I'm going to just show you my answers. Okay, so go ahead and pause and you try it. Okay, so here is what I did for the work. I'm gonna go ahead and show you, this one was a little different. That's my A, B, and C. I plugged it into the quadratic formula. Since I ended up getting the square root of 100 is positive and -10, that turns out a little different, but I do the same thing, but I can't keep it in simplest radical form because I can simplify radical 100. So then I keep going and I get 6 and 4. For number 4, it looked super confusing, right? Because I had that decimal. But here's all my work here. Same thing, I found A, B, and C. I divided the whole thing by -1. Remember I mentioned that before, so that my A is positive. If you don't do that, you'll still get the same exact answer, but it's a little more tedious. Plug it all in here. Kind of went through. That's my answer if I keep it in simplest radical form. And if I turn it into a decimal, that's when I split it into my 2 problems. 5 plus radical 37 over 16, 5 minus radical 37 over 16, and then those would be my answers. Okay, so that is how to solve a quadratic using the quadratic formula. And I also want to show you, whoops, sorry. This was the question I hadn't shown you before, but I just showed you all the work there. So now look at this part where it talks about the discriminant. And the reason the discriminant is helpful is because what it does is it shows you just how many answers there's going to be. So remember, if you have, just looking for some little paper here, sometimes, right, you'll have a quadratic that looks like that doesn't have any solutions because it doesn't go through the x-axis. Sometimes you'll have one that has one solution because it touches the x-axis, and sometimes you'll have two, right? And even if it's the other way, it's kind of the same thing. No solutions because they have to go through the x-axis, whether they're happy faces or frowny faces. Okay, so the discriminant just tells us how many answers there are. And the formula for the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. And where does that look familiar? That's the same part that's under the radical in the quadratic formula. Okay, so if you work out just the discriminant and you get a positive answer, you get positive 10, positive 100, positive 1, positive 0.8, positive anything, you know you're going to have two roots. Remember, roots are the same thing as solutions, which is the same thing as zeros. You know you're going to have two of them. If you plug in your A, B, and C to the discriminant and you get a negative answer, you're going to have no solutions because you can't square root a negative number, so you know that that picture is going to look something like this maybe, where it doesn't go through the x-axis. And if you plug it in and you get 0, you plug this in and you get 16 minus 16 or something, you get 0 here, then you know you will have one answer, which means the vertex is on the x-axis. All right, so I'm going to show you here. It says how many roots, and I also put solutions and zeros because those mean the same thing, does each equation have? All right, so we're going to plug this in just to this part. So I know my A, because it's in standard form, A is 1, B is -4, and C is 3. Okay, so B squared, -4 squared minus 4 times A times C. And sometimes I don't even work this out all the way because my main goal is just to find out, is it positive, negative, or 0? Okay, so I'm going to get 16 here minus 12. All right, I know that my answer is going to be positive. And so therefore, how many solutions do I have? I have 2 solutions because my answer was positive. All right, here. Now, it is okay to move these all to be, to switch the signs of everything, but we don't even have to do that. I can just say my A is -1, my B is 4, and my C is -4. So B squared, okay, let me go ahead and put B squared. So 4 squared minus 4 times A times C. Okay, so 4 squared is 16. I have -4 times -1 times -4. So -4 times -1 is +4. +4 times -4 is -16. I get 0 for an answer, which means I'm going to have 1 solution. Remember, these questions are just asking how many solutions do you have. Okay, so you guys go ahead and try those two. Let's see if I did those. And you can freeze the screen. Okay, and so here is my work for number 3 and number 4. I plugged it in, I wrote the discriminant, I plugged it in, I end up getting -4, which tells me because it's negative, there's no solution. And here I plugged it all in and I got -4 again, different work, and I got a negative, which is no solution. So that is today's lesson for how to solve a quadratic using the quadratic formula and the discriminant. I'm going to put an assignment up today I just want you to soak that all in, and then we will practice this a little bit more tomorrow. Okay, thank you. Have a good day.